listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracey Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians.
Hello and welcome to this episode. I'm really glad that you're joining me today. So whether you're listening, mucking out a stable, or you're driving, or maybe you're sitting at home with a quiet cup of tea, or whatever you're doing, I want to think about an issue that hits every single one of us, I think, at some stage in our equestrian journey. Maybe not so much the professionals, which is why I want to make that comparison. And it is talking about your motivation to ride, your riding mojo. Now, just before I start, I want to just thank everybody that has been listening and downloading. I've got another top 5. I think my podcasting software gives me, probably a top 20 or 25 or something like that. So 60% of people are in the United Kingdom. And then in second place, we've got the USA, third place, Germany, fourth, Singapore, fifth, Canada, sixth, Ireland. Then we've got Australia, Sweden, United Arab Emirates, Austria, and we've got lots and lots of lovely countries after that. So thank you so much. If you want to see your country pop into the top 5 or even the top 10, then just give it a little download and it will certainly pop up on my software. Okay, well, thank you very much. Even if you're listening and not downloading, that's super as well. So I'm thinking today about riding mojo. So, you know, the way that you feel, perhaps when you get a new horse or you go to a new yard and it makes you want to get out of bed in the morning. It gives you that impetus to get up on a freezing, pitch black morning to go and see your horse. Maybe it's a weekend day and, you know, it's that 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. start to get up for a show or a clinic. But sometimes that's somewhat lacking. And it might be that it feels like swimming through custard. And it's an uphill battle. And although it could be weather dependent or season dependent, very often it's kind of like in your own mind and kind of like how you perceive your energy levels. And it's very frustrating because a huge part of you wants to ride and the other part of you saying, oh, well, it'll be fine tomorrow, or I can leave it a week. And it's really exhausting because it's almost like having an argument with yourself 24 hours a day, because it doesn't have to do, but it can bring on that wave of guilt if you haven't ridden. So first of all, I'm just going to take a collective deep breath and let that guilt go. Because if you have, for whatever reason, lost a bit of that motivation, then let's normalize it. Because almost every rider, and I mentioned professionals previously, but it can also happen to professionals, then they experience dips where motivation just tanks. And that's okay. Normally, though, for the professional, then because it's their bread and butter, they do have to go out, no matter the weather, no matter the conditions, and sort out the horses. And it's not because you're a bad owner or that you've fallen out of love with your horse. We're going to have a little look at exactly why this happens, and we're going to use an NLP perspective to know what's going on in our unconscious or subconscious mind and explore the almost life-changing difference between motivation and drive. So why do people lose motivation? So I always look at what's happening underneath the conscious thoughts. The conscious thoughts are what you would say if you were sitting in a session with me and I say, what's wrong? How can I help you? because they're kind of rehearsed. They're kind of the things that are at the forefront of your brain, the things that occupy some of your self-chatter. It might be what you're telling yourself, because underneath that, there'll be a reason, because motivation doesn't just evaporate for no reason. And there are usually 2 or 3 big culprits that can swing either towards full motivation or half motivation or no motivation at all. And the first one, underneath what you're saying about your riding, is simply an overwhelm for life. And this is really, really common. What will happen is that because we love riding so much, or we love our horses, and we love seeing to our horses so much, that's the escape pod. That's where we go to just get away from work, get away from all kinds of other pressures that we have. And if that isn't perfect, then that's the thing that we think is the, in inverted commas, quote, broken. But very often a riding problem or a mindset problem that we think is to do with riding is actually a kind of metaphor for something else. So we are always juggling. You might have a really intense job. You might have family commitments. There could be financial nervousness. We all have household chores. We've all got relationships. And when you're running on empty, your unconscious mind will step in, because the unconscious mind has a job to protect you and preserve your energy. So it looks at the physical and emotional demands of riding and says, this is not in the urgent category. Let's put riding on the back burner because we can come back to it. So if you like, this is a defense mechanism. It's not that you can't cope or that you can't juggle or any of those things. It's entirely your unconscious mind saying, okay, let's say I've got 100 units of energy and 40 of those units are going to my job and 40 are going to my family and home. And I've got just 20 left for doing the chores and maybe running the kids around, relationships, and, all the other things. And I just can't fit it in energetically. The second thing is one that we don't really like to admit, but we can get fear and we can get other mental blocks because, fear is really sneaky and it doesn't always show up in the way that we expect, like a racing heart or shaking or your legs go to jelly. Sometimes it masks itself into something like procrastination or a lack of interest. So it's very curious. So you don't feel what you think you should, again, in inverted commas, feel. And so you could be, or one could be, avoiding riding or delaying a competition because your unconscious mind is trying to shield you from failing or what you think is failing. So believe it or not, you might even be terrified of the pressure that comes with succeeding. So, for instance, if something's happened, you've had a difficult training session, you've had a certain incident that wasn't very pleasant, or you felt judged by someone, maybe at the yard, or maybe an instructor or a coach, then those memories create neural blocks if we allow them to. And so your mind, it keeps telling you to stay away from riding because that will help you to avoid emotional discomfort. So again, your mind is protecting you all the time. And I suppose if there were a third reason, then it may be a broken routine. because many riders do rely entirely on pure willpower to stay consistent. So they write out a schedule, they plan the sessions, and then real life hits and it pours with rain for 4 days straight, or if you're in this country, probably more like 14 days straight or 40 days straight. And you know, or your horse loses a shoe or whatever might happen, and it breaks that momentum. And once the physical routine fades or disappears, the mental friction required to get back again feels quite difficult to overcome. So willpower is very much in the conscious mind, and it's only got a certain amount of energy to it. It's a bit like a phone, let's say, like a phone battery, because it will run out unless you keep recharging it all the time. So in NLP, we talk about two different things. We talk about motivation. Motivation is an emotion, and we talk about drive. And in everyday language, I think these two things get kind of mixed together because they sort of mean the same thing. But I want to explain why they are very different and how you don't necessarily need motivation to ride consistently. So when people talk about motivation, then they usually are talking about a feeling, some kind of inspiration, or they may be talking about a word-based motivation, which is an internal mental track that you talking yourself into action. So you're using maybe personal pep talks, repeating, I must ride today, I must ride today. So that could be a motivation, or it's a feeling to do it, or maybe it's the feeling of how you know you'll feel after you've done it. So that's motivation. But motivation is good. I'm not slating motivation. Motivation's wonderful. But what happens when you're genuinely exhausted, or you're stressed out by your job, or you've got some kind of worry or nerves? That feeling-based motivation vanishes because your mind, I suppose, is thinking more and more about comfort. And the word-based motivation, like, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. Think how good it will feel when I've done it. That turns into an argument with yourself because your tired brain is saying, but I'm exhausted. It won't make any difference if I don't ride. And then the other, the other side of your brain is trying to talk you into it. So if you rely, or if one relies on motivation alone, it's really quite challenging to achieve that consistency. So this is where drive comes in, because this is much deeper. And in its purest sense, I suppose drive is very much internal, and it pushes you towards a goal. And it doesn't matter how you happen to feel in that exact moment. So let me give you an analogy. So if you are hungry or thirsty, so let's say you're genuinely thirsty, you don't feel that you've got to wait for inspiration or motivation to give yourself a glass of water. You do it because it's kind of deeper than that, and it's a non-negotiable need. And so in equestrian terms, when you get that drive, it completely bypasses the debate in your head. And it also overrides the negative feelings or the fact that you have a lack of motivation, because you're driven towards a goal. So how do we shift from motivation, which is, a little bit unpredictable? How do we change from that to get drive? because the drive will keep you going on the dark mornings or dark nights and the cold and the wet and the rain, whatever. Drive will keep you going. Motivation will struggle. So the drive, what's behind it, is either, why am I doing this? Because you may have a goal, and if you think about the goal, that kind of ignites your drive. Or if it's been a long time since you've been riding consistently, then you might start by asking yourself, why did you start riding in the first place? Another way of questioning yourself is to think, for what purpose? What do I get from riding? So it could be that at an identity level, for example, that it's freedom. It's a partnership. What is riding providing you with? And this is worth just having a few moments to think about in a quiet time. Because if you get something like freedom, let's say, you think it gives me freedom, a sense of freedom, and you'll say, well, for what purpose freedom? Or what do I get from freedom? And you might say, exhilaration. Well, for what purpose exhilaration? What do you get from exhilaration? I'd say, I don't know. I'm trying to think what I get. I suppose it's for a few moments, the rest of the world disappears, and there is only me and my horse. And if you keep asking yourself, what do I get from that? What do I get from that? Eventually, you will come to something that really resonates with you. And whatever that thing is, then if you make sure that you remember that, you can write it on Post-its, you can put it on your phone, and use it as a daily anchor. Because this is at your core. This is the purpose. This is the way that you have constructed riding in your mind, what it truly gives you. And if you remind yourself of that, you tend to get that drive back. And excuses like weather, unless the weather is really atrocious and you wouldn't even go out for a walk, never mind a ride, then they start to lose their power. And if the deeper fears or maybe an old trauma is keeping you stuck, then again, just remember that those old neural pathways are stored in your unconscious, and they're just patterns, and patterns can be rewritten. And that's what we use NLP for, clearing away mental clutter and these blocks, whatever they might be, so that the natural drive can flow more easily without restriction. So thank you so much for spending these few minutes with me today. I hope that your lead boots are now put away in the cupboard and you can swim through the custard like nobody's business and reconnect with your deeper drive. Thanks ever so much. Take care, and I'll see you all really soon.